Hi everyone, today I'm going to do another video for the shelf isolation. The book I'm going to be talking about today, I actually only finished it this morning. Um, I'm quite keen to talk about it because I was surprised at how much I actually enjoyed it. A bit like when I spoke about Jane Eyre, this one's been on my list for ages, but I've never got round to reading it. Um, so it's J.D. Slanger's The Catcher in the Rye, and feel quite guilty for saying this because they say never judge a book by its cover, but the title, like, I've heard of it and it just didn't really sound interesting, so I think I've just avoided it. And I'm actually really annoyed at myself because it was a great book. Um, and the chapters are really short, so it's quite easy to get through. So I read this in like a day. Um, So it's set in 1940s America and it's a coming of age novel, so a Bildungsroman. Coming of age just meaning basically about growing up and accepting growing up, and the character usually goes through a learning process basically. Um, in this video, I don't want to go too much into the plot because, as I said, it's quite like an easy read. So if you choose to read it, I think you'll get through it quite quickly. Um, But when I started reading it, I knew I immediately wanted to do a video on it because I found the narration style really interesting, like from the start. So it's written in first person, and the protagonist, Holden Caulfield, he's around 17 years old, and it's through his point of view, basically. But I think I found it so interesting because there's a lot of colloquial, can't even get my words out, colloquial language in his dialect. So, for example, all through the book, he says things like, after he like gives information to the reader, he'll say to tell you the truth a lot, and there's that repetition, and he says like "God damn" all the time, and I did find it quite irritating at first. But then you learn that that's just part of his character, um, and yeah. So when he says to tell you the truth, it's ironic because from the opening of the book, we kind of find out that he like admits he's a compulsive liar. Um, so just that irony there, I thought it was quite funny. Um, so from the opening of the book, we can kind of infer that he's in some sort of facility. Um, so he says that like he's here at this place, like getting better after he got sick, and a lot of people have interpreted that as him being in like kind of like mental facility. But then he does kind of reference to the fact he maybe got tuberculosis, so it could be to do with that as well. But just as like a disclaimer, yeah, there is kind of references throughout the book to him being mentally unstable. So there's a lot of references to depression throughout it, and he'll say things like that depressed me quite a lot, pretty much in every scene in the book, and not overly referenced, but there's slight references to suicide as well. So that's just something to be conscious about if just as like a trigger warning, really, if you don't really like reading about them kind of things. Um, but I don't think that should detract you from reading the book because it's a lot more than that as well. Um, so just to give you a quick rundown, like plot wise. So as I've said, we're introduced and we think he's in some kind of facility, and it's like I'm going to tell you the story of how I got here, basically. Um, and we kind of learn that he's been to quite a few boarding schools, and he's currently at this school, and he's been kicked out, and kind of the narrative kind of follows these few days in which his parent thinks he's going home, but he can't go home early, but he's also been kicked out. So he kind of just wanders around New York and um, kind of like avoids going home basically. And each chapter in the book is kind of like a scene of what happens to him in New York. So, for example, he stays at hotels, he has encounters with prostitutes, but that's that might like shock you a bit, but it's kind of funny because all of these attempts like fail. So as I've said, like he has encounters with prostitutes, you probably assume that like he's had sex with them, but as you read, he doesn't. Um, Kind of he talks about friends and experiences with girls, but they're all failed relationships, and it's kind of he's trying to make these connections but can't. Um, and we get these. I found it quite interesting because throughout the book, there's lots of references to children, not in a weird way, but so we have three siblings. He's got a younger brother, a younger sister, and an older brother. And his younger brother, we find out, died. And this plays on his mind quite a lot, you can tell, because he references like stories about his brother quite a lot. And his little sister, he's very fond of her. Um, and basically, theme wise, it's really good for things like alienation, rebellion, innocence, sexuality, as I briefly mentioned, mental health, and also identity and kind of self-expression and acceptance. So basically, what I wanted to say is that I briefly mentioned this at the beginning. The title, when I've heard of this book before, I didn't really like kind of unpick it as what that could mean. So I think I was like, what the hell is the catcher in the rye? Um, and this kind of doesn't come clear until you start reading into the book. Um, it's quite around halfway through, I believe, but he basically is walking down the street and he hears this little boy singing and he listens to what he's saying, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's a line and it alludes to a Robert Burns poem. And he hears this and he's kind of like, hearing the boy sing makes him very happy. And later on, when he like, we get him talking to his sister like asks what he wants to be when he grows up, and he says he envisions himself in like the rye field, and he is the catcher. So again, it's alluding back to that poem, but he says he can just picture children playing in this rye field, and his role as the catcher is to kind of, so there's also a cliff edge, and his role as the catcher is to protect them from falling off the cliff. And if we read into this and what it means, it basically is he is wanting to protect these children and their innocence from the adult world and growing up. So throughout the book, you'll see that Holden constantly refers to things as being phony and the phoniness of things. So what this means is it's kind of the adult world as being superficial. So there's, just to give you brief examples of what I mean by this. So sometimes he'll go to like a play or the cinema and he says he hates these things. And this is because he says when he sees like people acting in a play, they're either that good that they just know they're good, and it's sometimes it's almost like it's mimicking too much of real life, and or sometimes it's just not representative of it at all. So he kind of finds faults with everything, and you'll see throughout the book he is quite critical of things. Um, I don't know. I really enjoyed it. So there's quite a lot of things that you could do with it. So a lot of it, well, one thing that made me laugh is kind of this failure at sexuality. Um, so he'll ask his friends a lot of questions about their sex lives, for example, and obviously I've mentioned about this failed encounter with a prostitute, but at times he'll say he's spoken like a really suave manner, and like he finds himself really sexy. But then we find out when he gets to be with this prostitute that he's actually a virgin. So kind of like maturity as well, I guess. There's parts where he's quite immature. So when he has arguments with people, he'll say like really stupid things. Um, and there's kind of funny moments where he wants to like hit someone, but he just knows that he won't because he's not that type of person. Um, so all these things that he tries to do, he fails, and he kind of, this phoniness I was referring to, he's kind of criticizing the adult world for like the conformity of it and like commercialization. Um, so kind of some interesting symbols in the book. There's one really important symbol, and it's a red hat. He calls it his red hunting hat, and he picked this up when he was in New York, um, at the beginning of the book when he's on like a trip with school. And this red hat, we'll see him put it on a lot of the time when he's out walking in the streets when it's cold at night, and he doesn't really know what he's doing, or put it on like just to sit in his dorm at the beginning, and he thinks it looks cool because he's got the peak to the back and things like that. And we kind of see him take this hat everywhere, because the span of the book in terms of like timeline, it's only actually over a few days, but we get references to things that happened in the past, and then at the end of the book we're back to like this facility that he's in, so back to present. um and this hat, it kind of, when he like reconnects with his sister at the end of the book, his sister actually puts the hat back on him, on his head, and it starts raining, and I thought that was like a really nice moment, because the hat for me kind of symbolized his individuality, and kind of all the way throughout the book you get this sense that he's trying to hold on to that, but then he doesn't know how to express it either. So there's a part where he's walking into the hotel and he doesn't want to have the hat on because he thinks he looks stupid, but then other times he'll wear the hat and he's like, I don't care what people thought. So it's kind of this struggle and kind of trying to accept himself. um so kind of gone into the plot briefly, but I'm not going to say any more about that. But I just think it was really good in terms of theme, and I enjoyed it a lot. And we kind of, there's a lot of adults that he'll meet throughout the book, and also like old acquaintances that you kind of realise that he kind of doesn't read situations as they should be. So there's an example where he wakes up and he's with one of his old teachers, and his teacher's got his hand on Holden's head, and Holden sees this as like very perverted, and that this guy was trying to make a pass at him and was assaulting him basically. But as a reader, you're really conflicted, because in a way it seemed like that, but then it also seemed very innocent as well. And all the events through the story, we kind of judge Holden as like being very critical and unstable. Like he drinks a lot of alcohol through the story, smokes a lot, doesn't get much sleep, doesn't eat much at all. So we kind of feel like, is his judgment almost tainted? Is he not in his right mindset? Um, so as I said, that's pretty much it. But it's kind of about self-preservation, as I've said, identity, innocence, childhood, kind of not wanting to accept that transition. Um, and yeah, I just thought, if you read it, it kind of speaks really well to like teenagers. I mean, I'm only just 20, and it's kind of like a similar age group, and kind of that struggle to fit in. Um, so yeah, so I think it's not a hard read, as I've said. It was really interesting, and I think it would work really good for coursework. But even if you don't want to do it for coursework, just while we've got the time, really, it's a really interesting book, and I wish I would have read it before because I really enjoyed it. Um, that's probably one of the nicest books I've read in a long time. Not nice in the sense that I know that we've said about like the references to like mental health and suicide and things like that, but you kind of understand all those contemporary issues, I guess. Because this book was round about like 1950s time, and it spoke quite to me how it's still relevant, basically. Um, so yeah, you should go and read it. So thanks.